there. Hello.
Okay, we have a very special guest, a return guest, shall I say, Brian Deese, our NEC director, who's going to give some brief comments on the data out this morning, answer a couple of questions, and then we'll proceed from there. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brian Deese.
Thanks, Jen. Good to be with you all today. I just at the top wanted to make a couple of points about of context on our current economic situation, and then happy to take questions that you have. So 4 quick points. First is the context on our economic recovery. We've learned, based on data that we received over the last several days, that in 2021, our economy experienced the largest single drop in the unemployment rate on record in the history of the country, down to 3.9%. The most jobs created in any year on record, 6.4 million. The strongest economic growth of any year in nearly 4 decades, coming in between 5 and 6% over the course of 2021 in all likelihood. And real household income that is taking into account of price increases increased in 2021. So just to repeat that context, the largest decline in unemployment, the most jobs created, and the strongest economic growth in nearly 40 years. The second point is we got December price data today, and I would note that we saw a welcome deceleration in the rate of price increases in a number of respects. In the headline price increase data, we saw a decline month to month to 0.5%, down from 0.8% in the month before. It's still too high, but a moving in the right direction. As I think I say every time here, and if I don't, it's a mistake, we never index too heavily on any individual 1 month of data in any direction. But I would note that we saw in prices from November to December a decline in the rate of growth of the prices for food at home, which is a technical way of saying food that people buy in the grocery store. And we saw a drop in the price of energy, both at the gas pump, but also natural gas and winter heating costs. And many of you focused on the annual 7% rate. If we are trying to look at where we are headed, the month-to-month changes are more instructive. And most independent forecasters continue to project that we will see moderation in price increases over the course of 2022. Third point is the global context for this data, both on prices and on economic growth writ large. What we're seeing right now is these price increases are a global phenomenon, and that reflects the nature of the global challenge of coming through a pandemic crisis and a pandemic-affected recovery. Over the past 6 months, price increases in the United States and Europe have basically run neck and neck. In December, the EU saw its highest recorded inflation on record. Germany saw its highest inflation in December since reunification. And so while there are differences, but country by country, this is a global phenomenon and driven by these global issues, which comes to the fourth point, which is given the unique strength of the United States economic recovery, overall growth, as well as the labor market, we are well positioned to attack the challenges of prices and costs head on. And that's exactly what the president and this administration are doing. And it's his principal focus when it comes to the economy. As he laid out on Friday, his approach to attacking prices and costs are grounded in the premise that the right way to do this is to build on the economic successes that we have seen, not to abandon them. And that really means, with respect to what we in the administration and Congress can do, is to focus on how we can expand the productive capacity of the economy, how we can make sure that our economy can produce more goods and services more cheaply and easily across the country, get more people working, and get to the strong, sustainable growth that we are beginning to see. And if we can address these present challenges, we'll hopefully see going forward. The President's outlined a very specific three-part plan to do that around unsticking supply chains, protecting consumers, and promoting competition, and trying to actually reduce directly some of the most significant costs that Americans' families face. And obviously, key elements of the Build Back Better framework go directly at that issue. And so I'm happy to talk about the policy details behind that plan in general, but I think just to summarize, we have historically strong economic growth and labor market outcomes. We saw some welcome deceleration, but price increases that are still too high. Decidedly a global phenomenon happening everywhere, but we in the United States are uniquely well positioned against that challenge, and that's the President's focus.
All right, Jeff.
Brian, thanks for coming today. The White House and other economists last spring and fall were talking about inflation being transitory, and I think at least the expectation when we were talking about it last spring was that it was going to be well taken care of by now. What did you get wrong? What did economists writ large get wrong? And why should Americans be confident when you say prices are going to get better later this year?
So I think that if we look at the situation earlier in the year, a number of projections and forecasts have come out differently than we anticipated. If you look at employment, for example, virtually nobody was projecting that we would see unemployment fall as quickly as it has, and get to 3.9% by the end of this year. That's 4 years faster than the median forecaster. And so I think we've seen a number of unanticipated outcomes. When it comes to prices, what we have said consistently and focused consistently is that this is a global phenomenon. It is connected to the pandemic and the issues that that has raised. Certainly the supply chain challenges that have evolved over the course of time through the Delta variant and over the course of the fall have been issues that we've had to go and tackle head on. But I think that the nomenclature aside, we find ourselves in a position now where we're looking forward, and most forecasters are projecting that the price increases will moderate. Our focus here is looking at what are the concrete, practical steps that we can take to try to help ensure that outcome and try to help accelerate relief where we can, where we appropriately can. So when it comes to something like the supply chain challenges, those manifested more significantly than people were anticipating over the course of the summer and early fall, both because of COVID factors, but also buying behavior of major retailers and major freight movers. And so we went into action over the course of the fall to try to help address those issues and the bottlenecking we were seeing at ports. Made very significant progress on that, 40% decline in the amount of time that a container is sitting at the dock. And at the same time, we still have work to do on that front, which is why even this month we're going to take additional steps with ports across the country to set up inland locations to move products and impose new fees on empty containers that are sitting idle at our ports. So we're going to stay at that and other issues, and we believe that that's the best way that we can again help to expand the economy's capacity to deliver goods and services to the American people.
But is it the supply chain then essentially that is the reason for the incorrect forecast 10 months ago?
Look, I think that our focus now is on assessing where we are and trying to address the issues in front of us in an effort to try to accelerate the course of the recovery. As I said, this has been a unique year on a lot of accounts. And so we find ourselves in a uniquely strong economic position on a number of counts, and we've got price increases that we need to tackle, and that's our focus.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Brian, for being here. I have a quick question on some of the practical matters that you've talked about. Are you taking any steps to help people afford food, despite the figure that you mentioned that month to month the prices have gone down? My colleagues are reporting about how people are finding shortages on the shelves, how the stuff that is there is more expensive. Is there anything you can do to help families pay for that food?
Well, I would say a number of things. One is when the president came into office, he prioritized early passing the American Rescue Plan. The American Rescue Plan has historic investments in actually addressing food insecurity for people who couldn't afford food. As a result, we saw hunger in the United States decline in 2021. It also included the child tax credit, another resource that are going directly to families to help address the typical costs that they face on a monthly basis. And as a result, we saw child poverty fall by 35 to 40% in America over the course of 2021. We saw, as I mentioned, we saw some welcome deceleration in the increase in the cost of food this month, and we're going to keep focused on those ways that we can address the typical pocketbook issues that the American people face. And this is one of the issues why the core economic logic behind the president's, behind the Build Back Better plan is important in this context, because for working Americans who are benefiting from a strong labor market and more job opportunities, but also struggling with costs not only of food, but costs of childcare or the costs of health care. The components of the Build Back Better plan would directly address those issues by providing a tax cut to families directly in their pocketbook, and then reducing other of their most salient costs. So for a lot of the families that you're talking about, if they only had to pay 7% of their income in childcare, that would free up a lot of resources to invest in other monthly needs. So,
and short of that passing, and separate from what you have already done, the measures you mentioned, is there anything new you can do to help the food situation?
Well, I would say first, what we have done is historic and has made a big difference. Number two, our central economic legislative priority is getting those elements of Build Back Better in place, and part of the urgency of that is to address precisely the challenges that you are identifying. And beyond that, we are looking at ways that we can unstick elements of the supply chain that may be getting in the way of, for example, physical product getting to market. And certainly we have seen over the course of this fall, we've seen concerns about product shortages in particular categories and otherwise. What we've seen overall, if you look at retail inventories, including grocery store inventories, they're actually higher now than they were pre-pandemic, so in a pretty healthy place. But that doesn't mean that there's logistical challenges at bottlenecks that may be localized. And to the degree that we can work with private sector companies and help, ease the challenges in their private sector supply chain, certainly we will remain open to doing that.
I do have one question on the global challenge, since you mentioned it, the president mentioned it today. Can you talk about how much you believe China's latest round of lockdowns and its zero case doctrine is having an impact on inflation, since obviously it's impacting the global manufacturing? And has the administration had any conversations with China about the factory workers, about the lockdowns?
So there's no question that the global nature of the pandemic affects global supply chains and has affected the flow of goods across economies. One of the things that we did earlier this fall was actually set up what we call an early warning system, working with a number of our American companies that rely on sourcing input components or products from Southeast Asian countries to identify where there might be COVID outbreaks in those countries and work with the State Department and USAID and the CDC on the ground in those countries to do what we can to actually help to stabilize the situation and reduce the potential impact of a shutdown or a lockdown or otherwise. With respect to China specifically and the current moment, we're monitoring it very closely as we assess the issue today. the lockdowns are most likely to have the effect isolated in China because the production facilities in those geographies are principally suppliers to the Chinese market. But the situation is fluid and ongoing and something that we're monitoring in real time and working across the interagency, including the State Department and the CDC, to try to keep a handle on.
Thank you.
Brian, respecting that you said that prices are expected to moderate in the months ahead, Americans right now at the start of 2022 are setting their budgets. They're trying to figure out how much things are going to cost them, for themselves, and for their families. How much longer should Americans expect that they'll be paying these inflated prices?
So what I can say is that in the context of a strong economy, most independent forecasters expect these prices to moderate over the course of 2022, and that's consistent with the administration's view. You have a president and an administration that's waking up every day and thinking about the practical actions we can take to try to help accelerate that, protecting, unsticking supply chains, protecting consumers, make sure that consumers aren't being taken advantage of in a moment of uncertainty.
So for clarity, that means by the end of 22, it's moderated, or we're kind of back to where we were before this by those projections?
Well, if you look at the projections by independent forecasters, then you see moderation over the course of 22, and you get back to you get back to levels that are closer to pre-pandemic normal. But I think that in the short term, in the immediate term, I think we'll focus on the practical steps that we can take. Focus working with Congress, encouraging Congress to take practical steps that would have real concrete impact for those families in their lives right now, and delivering in practical concrete ways. And I think that as we have seen with what we were able to get done in 2021 to deliver that type of relief directly to families, that can make all the difference, and that can really help to bridge this gap for families, and also help to get more people to work. That we continue to face real challenges where parents and other caregivers in this economy want to get back to work but are held back because of the cost of actually finding a quality way to take care of a kid or take care of an elderly parent. That's compounded by the pandemic, and us acting now to help address those costs for families would not only provide some peace of mind to those families. If every American family with kids knew they weren't going to pay more than 7% of their income in childcare, that would be a big weight off their shoulders. It'd also be a big benefit to the labor market by allowing more people to work as productively as they choose to.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. You mentioned the port measures you're taking, setting up these off-site areas. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And the dwell fees, they've had that on hold for weeks at Port of Long Beach and Port of LA. Are you talking about imposing a dwell fee on other ports? In other words, can you give a little more detail on what you're talking about? Sure.
Sure. We're going to go a little deep on ports, but this is exciting for me. No, it's good. I'm thrilled. So the first issue of the inland ports, and the idea here is relatively simple, which is if you're having to offload all of the containers at one location, it creates a bottleneck. It means fewer things moving through. If you can push that product out to facilities inland, then you can increase the throughput. We've taken steps at the Port of Savannah to open multiple ports, and we've seen real progress there. Reduction in the backlog coming into the Port of Savannah quite noticeably. So we're going to take action at the Port of Oakland, finalizing inland port opportunities there, basically running the same play there as well. And we're working through the national port associations to basically work with any port that sees that as an opportunity to try to deploy that. And we have money that we have been able to deploy associated with the president's infrastructure legislation to try to help move that as quickly as possible. On the dwell fees, there's the issue around the fees on import containers that they have identified and said they're willing to impose. Just the threat of doing that was actually quite effective at getting the ocean carriers to move on their own and provide incentives, carrots and sticks to move that through. Now, this month, they're focused on a fee on export containers, basically the empty containers that are sitting idle that need to be moved off and shipped off in order to create more space. And they have announced that they will impose those fees by the end of the month. But as you know, part of the announcement of those fees is to give everybody an opportunity to figure out, is there a more efficient way to solve this than the imposition of those fees? But that's where things stand.
Forgive me, both you and Jen, for asking about the Fed. On December 1st, you said that the president would be making choices in the coming days on the 1st. And you said that part of the reason to make those picks was so people could, quote, face squarely head on the economic challenges that we face, the governors can. So at the time, we're talking about imminent picks that would help the central bank, who the president is now banking on to help fight inflation, see around corners and address crises. 6 weeks later, we don't have picks. So I guess my question is, what's the holdup? What changed? And do you think that 6-week delay is having an impact? I mean, you're relying on the Fed to be able to help curb inflation, and they don't have a full bench.
So in your last question, no, I don't think it's having an impact. I think that the most immediate issue on that score is that the president's two nominees to be the chair and the vice chair of the Fed are now up in front of the Senate. One had his confirmation hearing yesterday. The other will have her confirmation hearing tomorrow. And Senate moving expeditiously to confirm both of those nominees is important, and we are grateful to the leadership, the committee leadership of Chairman Brown and others in the Senate for moving quickly, and that is important. At the same time, we are working closely with congressional leadership to finalize those additional nominees, and are confident that we can move them on a schedule that will mean that they will be in place at the appropriate cadence. So I don't have any news for you today about that personal announcement, but
is inflation like a ball game when you're making these considerations in terms of considering particular candidates one against the other, or is it part of a range of factors?
So I think the president laid out his thinking relatively, in a sort of relatively detailed way in the context of announcing Chairman Powell and Governor Brainerd for the positions that he's nominated them to. And I think that basic approach extends to the other chairs as well. So obviously, expertise, independent judgment, and proximity to the range of issues that the Fed is facing. Obviously, central among them is charting a course of monetary policy that sustains the strength of recovery and achieves the dual mandate while making sure that prices are not entrenched, but also facility with other, front and center issues like financial regulation and the financial threats associated with climate change.
Mary and Sutton, and then we'll have to wrap it up. But you mentioned that you expect prices to moderate over the course of the year, but how worried are you that consumers and businesses are starting to expect inflation is here to stay and will act accordingly, especially as many workers aren't feeling any increase in wages due to the increase in prices?
So it's a concern, and it's why you heard the president on Friday reinforce that the Fed should and needs to have the independence to act to make sure that prices don't become entrenched. I would say that if you look at the market, you haven't seen a noticeable move in long-term inflation expectations as of recently, and so it's a concern, but it's also part of why we think that acting in the way that we've laid out and respecting the independence of the Fed is the right approach. And I think that for typical people who are working and thinking about their household budgets, for many of them, they've never seen a labor market that offers as many job opportunities as they have right now. For people in the bottom 40% of the income distribution, wage increases are up at historic levels, which creates new opportunities. And for many people, they are taking this opportunity to start new businesses and innovate. We've seen the rate of new applications for small businesses increase by 30%, and that's that's an opportunity for those people and the people that they will employ, but also a real driver of innovation and a signal of the health and the kind of economy and economic growth that we can drive if we keep at this. And the last thing I would say is that for those typical folks sitting around the kitchen table thinking about this coming year, the largest single costs that families face are healthcare, childcare, the cost of a home, and we have concrete, practical, straightforward ways to deliver relief on those costs and to do so in a way that wouldn't add to aggregate demand, wouldn't create an inflation concern, would be fully paid for across time. And in fact, the principal long-term economic impact would be to expand our economy's productive capacity by getting more people into the workforce. So that's why our focus and our work on Build Back Better continues. And I guess we will leave it there. Oh, no, we have one more. Okay.
Build Back Better, with the White House support adding a work requirement like Senator Manchin has discussed to the child tax credit as part of the package?
So I think the president has spoken to the importance of the child tax credit and his views on that topic. I would say that if you look at the child tax credit itself, 97% of the recipients of the child tax credit are working, and among the remaining 3%, the majority are grandparents or people with disabilities. So I think that you have a tool that is delivering relief to working families right now. And in fact, what we've seen over the course of 2021 is that as that tax cut was delivered to families, we actually saw labor force participation and the employment to population ratio increase. Meaning that we saw more people get into the workforce. And that's consistent with evidence historically and in other countries where they have similar child allowances, where you see no evidence of a negative impact on labor force participation, and in some cases a positive impact because it frees people up to work more. So certainly the president is focused on how to get more people working and make sure that that people have opportunities in this labor market, and the child tax credit is actually a very well-designed tool to do that.
It sounds like at a minimum the White House doesn't think it's necessary or it's redundant or as part of the package.
Yeah, certainly the child tax credit is operates in a way that goes to working families. And does not create any disincentive for people to work, and if anything, would help more families and more people get into the labor market.
All right,
Can
thank
I
you,
ask
Brian.
more about the global phenomenon?
All right, kick it up. All right, last one, Raquel, on his way out.
Thank you so much, Brian. What do you make of statements that the pandemic will not be the #1 public enemy for the global economy this year, but will be inflation and how central banks around the world could be the #1 enemy of the global economy? How central banks respond to inflation and inflation?
Well, what I'd say to that is they're interlinked, and that is has been true and has been a feature of our economy and our economic recovery for the last year and a half. To the first question, that the more effective we are as a global community, as a United States and as a global community, at working to contain this pandemic, get it under control, reduce the impact on people and individual health, but also on economic operations and supply chains and otherwise, the more quickly we can normalize supply chains and address the price increases, which are decidedly a global phenomenon. So I don't think that I don't think it's an either or. I think that there is an urgent and compelling priority to address the COVID pandemic globally, which is why you see this administration and the president acting across the board, from vaccines to the other support that we're providing globally, and that the more effective we are at doing that, the more runway we'll provide for the global economy to grow while mitigating price increases.
All right, thank you, Brian Deese.
Thank you all.
Thank you very